Charlotte. When did you know that? Well, you qualified fifth, so you were obviously pretty good off the truck. When did you know you had something for them?
Did not qualify fifth. It rained out qualifying.
Don't let the facts get in the way of a good story.
Yep, I was 42nd in practice.
Oh.
I told Glover, Tony Glover was the team manager, and he and Lee McCall kind of shared the crew chief duties. I told them, I was like, Talladega, feel pretty good about. As I've said, I like those type tracks. Those seem to do well for me. And at Talladega, we ran, I think, in the top 5 most of the race, and ran out of gas before the last pit stop, so we didn't finish well. I told them the whole week heading to Charlotte, I was like, not a good track for me. Actually, I would say probably my worst track if I had to pick one. I was super intimidated by Charlotte. It was slick. It was bumpy. Bruco, historically, that hadn't been a great track for them. And I feel like I had only run there in their cars, and they didn't really like going there either. So when you're with a team and the whole week at the shop, or for 2 years, they tell you how bad they are at a track, you tend to think you're not going to be good at that track. And I told those guys, they're like, no, Glover, and everyone's like, it's a good track for us. We ran 5th there in the spring, whatever. They're like, we're going to be fine. I'm like, okay. So we go there and we get to do practice in qualifying trim. And I remember making my first run, and what I remember is not driving the car. And I say that I gave it wide open throttle. I got to the corner, it bounced, and I just held on until it pointed a direction, and I gave it gas again. I had no control. And Glover came over and put the window net down when we came in the garage stall. And if you know Glover, he's an interesting guy, and I love him. And he kind of is not looking me in the eye, and he's looking around the car, and he's like, well, little buddy, he's like, you weren't lying. And I'm kind of looking at him, and he's like, not very good here, huh? And I was like, I told you. And so, he's being a cheerleader, and I think we do a couple other runs. And in the process of making these runs, he or the spotter, Lauren Raniero spotting, they are telling me, they're like, you got to stay above the bump. There was a concrete patch in turn 3. And they're like, you got to stay above that before you turn down into the corner. And I'm like, okay. And I remember getting on the racetrack, and it's hard to explain to people that have never driven a car. But at the time, Xfinity Series cars or Busch cars made 500 horsepower. Cup cars made 850 horsepower. And the difference was mind-boggling. Like it was 8 or 10 miles per hour top end speed, which doesn't sound like much, but things were going by way faster than I'd ever seen them. And I remember leaving the pits on a qualifying run, and I'm like, I don't see a concrete patch. I don't have time to see a concrete patch. And what I didn't know is I was driving right through it, and I would hit it, and it would bounce me up the racetrack, and I'd miss the whole corner. So it rains out qualifying. We start 5th. The next day, I run the Busch car, and I don't remember where I started. It might have rained out qualifying for that too. I don't know where I started, but I remember I was running 3rd, and we were the fastest car on the track. And I'm like, oh my! And what happened was I got back in the Busch car, and it was slower, and it had no power. And I remember going down the backstretch on like lap 1, and I looked in turn 3, and I'm like, oh my gosh, I see that concrete patch. And I drove around it, and it was smooth. And I'm like, I missed all the bumps. And the next lap I did it, and also I just kept getting faster and faster and faster.
This is in the Busch car?
Mm-hmm. This is on Saturday in the Busch car.
Yeah.
And I'm like, I get it now. And so I was running 3rd. The motor blows up. We don't finish. We start the Cup race the next day, 5th, because qualifying's rained out. And it was actually a rain delay race. It was supposed to be run in the afternoon. Long rain delay. We started at night. But we were pretty quick. I mean, I don't remember ever at the beginning of the race ever thinking we're going to win, because I'd never won a race at that point. I had not won a Cup, any of the big top 3 series. I'd never won a race. But I just remember they just kept saying your lap times are as good as the leader. And we ran, I don't remember the position, but we ran really well the whole race. Another interesting fact is that up until the week before at Talladega, I had never made a green flag pit stop in racing. Like through my truck races in Xfinity Series, I had never made a green flag pit stop. There had always been a caution that had come out.
You're joking.
I had never made a green flag
Really?
pit stop. Yeah. Talladega went caution free. The whole race went caution free. The first 3 or 4 pit stops at Charlotte were caution free. I ran 300 miles caution free. So I made like 7 pit stops, green flag. In like my Cup career, the first like 6 or 7 pit stops were all green flag stops. And I had never done that before. And I remember being, nervous. And it's obviously at the time, and this is just crazy to think that there were no timing lines, or there were timing lines, but they just did it by a stopwatch. It just, we did our tax, it was a guess, right? Like as long as you didn't look like you were flying, you weren't speeding. It was a different time. But I just remember we made a pit stop at some point with 100 laps to go, and we did 2 tires. We did something on the pit stop that got me to the lead. And I mean, you talk about nervous. I'm like, oh my gosh, I'm leading this thing. And at the time, lap down cars lined up on the inside. It was just lead lap cars on the outside. And I think Bobby and Tony were behind me. And I feel like they'd maybe led most of the race, but I kind of leapfrogged them. But I didn't think at the time I would hold them off. I you're just racing and going to wait and see what happens. But we started racing, and I got away from them. And we had to make another green flag pit stop. And I remember in the race, I'm like, if you can just not screw this up, like you're going to have a chance at winning this. We make the green flag stop. Bobby pitted a lap or 2 before us. We pitted. I merged up off turn 2, and Bobby was 10 car lengths behind me and kind of stayed there the rest of the race. Yeah. Became my favorite track then.
Funny how that works.
Yeah.
In those last few laps, though, Bobby did come after you pretty hard.
Yeah, and I don't. I've watched that race back. Yeah, or I remember seeing clips. Like I don't remember why. Every once in a while, like on social media, someone will post a clip of that, like the last lap or the last 2 laps, and it looks like he got really close to me. But I knew, like, I wasn't worried about it. I just remember in the car, I'm like, yeah, because I think for me, I started driving just. I don't remember if the balance was off, but I remember driving a little easier. I knew I had a little more in me, and it got a little exciting on the last lap. But I just remember in the car, I was like, I'm not worried about it. Like you know what I mean? Like sometimes in the car, things appear better or worse than what they do on TV. But I don't remember being any like concerned about that at all.
You don't remember thinking that something was going to fall off the car? Or...
The only thing that I remember is when we did the pit sequence where we leapfrogged to get to the lead, when I was warming the tires up, I had never heard the lead slide in the car. And it was like they put the lead in the frame rails, and it's these, the frame rails are like 3x4, and the lead just barely slides in there. And they normally pack that tight enough that it can't move. And it's like they had left like too much of a gap. And so when I would gas it, the lead would slide back, and I would hear it clunk. And I'd get on the brakes, and it would go forward, and I would hear it clunk. And I remember and I hadn't heard it all weekend, and I was kind of telling them that. And so like they're like, it's fine, it's just the lead in the front. But in there, I'm like, I don't know. Like I'm like, is all the tires going to fly off this thing?
What was that next week like for you? I mean, I can't imagine what that.
I will tell you that
like.
Victory Lane was hard. Because I put myself immediately in Sterling's position. Because I got to Victory Lane, and as excited as all the crew guys were, and Chip and Felix and my dad happened to be there, they gave me a cell phone with Sterling on it. And I remember telling myself, don't act as much as you wanted to get out and just jump on the roof and scream and like, I mean, it's the biggest thing that ever happened to me in my whole life. I'm like, I want to make sure that I'm respectful to Sterling because he's sitting at home with a broken neck, and there's no worse feeling than a driver getting in your car and doing well, much less a guy that's never won a race and a kid. And like, I just remember like talking to, and Sterling wasn't a hero of mine, but he was one of the guys that I looked up to. He'd been in Cup forever, and he'd won 2 Daytona 500s. And I remember meeting Sterling the first time, and couldn't have been a nicer guy. But I mean, like you meet people that you see on TV, and you're a little starstruck. And I was starstruck by everybody in the Cup garage. And all of a sudden, Sterling was my team. Like he wasn't even my teammate at the time. I'm in his car. And he was super nice on the phone, but I just remember I'm like, you need to put yourself in his shoes and what that must feel like. And so it was hard to like control like how excited I was versus don't.
What is it in your DNA that allows you to think like that? Because I believe that most people would have got out of that car and just went nuts.
Yeah, I don't know. I guess maybe if they hadn't handed me the cell phone and I talked to him, it would have, maybe that would have been, I don't know if it would have been different or not, but it was his car. I mean, it was, you know what I mean? Like it wasn't my car. It wasn't my number. It wasn't, none of those were all his guys. And so I don't, I mean, Rick, I don't know. I mean, I don't know. I just remember even after that, I think I downplayed the significance of that the whole time. I don't know that I ever I mean, I think what in hindsight, you're like, you should have stuck your chest out and been like, look at me, right? Like, look what I did. I got in this great car and I won. I don't know. I just didn't feel that way.
You didn't want to be Russ Wheeler in Days of Thunder.
I did not want to be him. That is a fact. Yes.
Did you hear from anybody that kind of surprised you that next week?
You know, I don't remember that. I do remember, just thought about this the other day. I do remember a lot of media, and I remember doing a piece at the race shop. There used to be a show. You know who Sean Hannity is?
Yeah.
The Fox News host.
Yeah.
There was a show. He used to do a show. It was called Hannity and Combs. And it was like Sean was the conservative, and I don't remember Combs' first name, but he was the liberal, and they would kind of debate, right? And I remember a girl coming to interview me to be on that, and I don't even know why I was on that show. I don't know what the tie was.
Yeah.
I was doing things that I had never done before, right? I mean, I just kind of got put in this huge spotlight, and for as big as, and it might be, this might not be a correct statement, but to me, for as big as NASCAR is now, I just don't know that there was a bigger era than there was 2002 to 2007. Like, it just, for me, that like 5-year span, and maybe it's just because it kept growing so much through that, but it just seemed like it was bigger than ever then.
I think everybody considers their era.
Yeah, so that's fair. I wondered that.
Yeah, doing the newspapers and scanning them.
Yeah,
the people from the '80s, Junior Johnson was talking in the '80s about how good the good old days were in the '60s.
Yeah, so that's interesting. Like I wonder that. Like, if people, like, if William Byron will be like, oh, I'm telling you, 2020. Oh yeah, that was the. Like, I wonder that. Yeah, that's. I'm glad to hear you say that, because I was curious about that.
Yeah. You mentioned earlier you had never won a bush race, but almost immediately you go out and you went on fuel mileage at Atlanta.
Yep.
In the bush car.
Mm-hmm.
Then, and certainly this was not anything that you could plan on. You go to Rockingham, and Jeff Green and Michael Waltrip.
Waltrip wrecked Jeff Green.
Yeah. Well, okay. Well, that would be something that Jeff Green would point.
Yeah, for sure. That's exactly what happened.
Was it just a confidence thing at that point? Because it was, I mean, I remember, well, he won the Cup Series. Now, all of a sudden, he's shot out of a cannon.
It's crazy. It was
in the Busch Series.
Like, clearly, those Atlanta fuel mileage, a little bit lucky there. I shouldn't say that, because to get lucky, you have to be in the right position. And Joe Nemechek, shouldn't have won the race that day. He ran out of fuel. Michael Waltrip, I think, should have won that day. I remember Michael being significantly faster than everybody else. But because he was so fast, he was using more gas, and he had to pit. And then Joe Nemechek was on that same strategy we were on, and then he didn't make it, and we did. And then Rockingham, again, had a pretty fast car. We're running third with, lap to go, and those two got together. I mean, but it wasn't just that we won. It was like every week after. What happened was, after I got in the Cup car, and I told you how fast it was, the Busch car got easy. Like I would get back in it. It didn't even have to be right. And that was one of the advantages in that era when you would see Cup guys come down and run the Busch series. Not only are they more talented than the Busch regulars, than most of them, when you get out of a Cup car, everything happens so slow in the Busch car that like it's just
Wow.
easier. And so everything that you're doing, you're just like, it's just happening at half speed. And so I would run that Cup car and practice. I'd get in the Busch car and I'm like, well, it doesn't even have to be perfect because I'm just going to hustle it here and figure it out.
Was that just a matter of more seat time?
Well, I think it was that there's definitely confidence that is built into that. And, one of the things to backtrack a little bit in our conversation, when Clarence was was talking about not renewing me for the next year in 2002, I went to a guy here in Charlotte, lived in Kentucky, and I went to a guy, his name's Jacques Dallaire. He's still around today, still does a lot of drivers. And he essentially, there was a little bit of physical stuff that happened there, but what he teaches you, and I still use it every single day of my life, is how, and the best analogy I can give you is if you're a golfer, so what you think doesn't always happen, but a lot of times what you think will happen. And if you're a golfer and you walk up to a hole and there's water on the right-hand side, you're a right-handed golfer and you always slice it, and you see water, if you walk up to the ball and you tell yourself, don't slice it, don't slice it, don't slice it, there's water on the right, your odds of hitting in the water are pretty good. If you're the same guy and you walk up to the ball and you say, all right, I'm going to hit this straight, I'm going to have a slow backswing, and I'm going to watch this ball go down the middle of the fairway, it might not happen, but your chances are significantly greater of not hitting it in the water. And so, and I say that because if you're a pit crew member and the car's coming down pit road, the last thing that guy should say to himself is, don't leave any loose, don't leave any loose, don't leave any loose. He should be saying, I see 5 tight, I'm going to see 5 tight. Like, you should just tell yourself what you want to happen. And so I said that story in 30 seconds. Over a couple of days, he teaches you how to think the right way. And there's exercises that I did every single night for 10 minutes. You'd lay down and you had these 10 key words that you would focus on that you thought are the ways you thought when you performed at your best. And he would teach you how there are some days that you lead the whole race and the motor blows up and you finish last. And you can't dwell on the result. You have to look at how you performed personally. And so I learned that the year before. And then when things started going well, I started being able to capitalize on my mind. And I have to have a refresher in that every once in a while because I go down the wrong path. But all of that just started working out.
After winning that soon at the Cup level, what did that do for your expectations moving forward? Was there maybe a sense of pressure that you had to do that every race?
I would tell you that 2003, we did not win a race, but we could have won 7 races or 10 races. We had Indy. Indy was a race, had by far the best car, led it down to not just right at the end. At times we were 3/4 of a second faster than the second place. They had a restart late in the race. The lap down cars got to line up in front of the lead lap cars if they didn't pit. I remember it was Dave Blaney, and I'm not placing blame on Dave Blaney, but he lined up. I was the leader. He lined up right in front of me. I don't know if he missed a gear, just had a bad restart. He got me choked up, and Kenseth and Harvick got by me on the restart, and I finished 3rd. Southern 500, we had the best car without a doubt. We just had bad pit stops and couldn't you make 13 pit stops at Darlington, you can't overcome it. There were a lot of races in 2003 that we should have won. So my expectations were high going into 2003, but 2003, 4, 5, we did not win a race. But 2004, we just every single week we were a contender. It didn't work out. So my expectations were high, but also the performance was really good the next 3 years. Just didn't get back to victory lane.
I did want to ask about one other Busch Series finish, and you probably know which one it is. You had this crazy finish with Todd in the spring Busch Series race at Darlington in '03, the day after the famous Cup finish between Ricky Craven and Kurt Busch. What do you remember about those last few laps? Because it was fun to watch.
Yeah, I remember, I think Stacy Compton stayed out or didn't pit under green. I don't remember the circumstances, but he had like a 15-second lead with 10 laps to go. And, Todd and I were running 3 seconds a lap faster than he was. And I remember thinking, I think Todd was ahead of me at the time. And I remember thinking, we've got to get to Stacy first. We got by Stacy. And Darlington, especially at that time, the cars were not as aero dependent as they became. The noses were 4 feet off the ground in the corners. And I just remember, like today, you get a shot at somebody. If you get inside of them, if you don't complete it, it's just, you'd spend 20 laps to make that pass again. But at that time, I just remember like there was 10 times that one of us should have been able to get away and you couldn't. And then on the last lap, Todd ran like super high in 3 and 4, which was the preferred lane. And I had found some grip kind of in the middle of the track, and I got a really good run on him, and I had it won, no doubt. And Todd dirtied me. I mean, there's no way around it. I think he's actually admitted that to me because we've worked together at Fox, the last 5 or 6 years. And I think at some point that's come up, and Todd in a laughing manner is like, you got to do what you got to do. And I honestly, I had so much fun that day racing. That was just, that's what every kid racing a go-kart right now wants to be in a last lap battle in a big stock car race.
You were this close to winning backwards.
It was, and I tried to go. I steered backwards trying to get there because you're so close, knowing that But it was interesting that year. I mean, 2 of the better finishes in Busch and Cup history, back-to-back days. Yeah.